I'm a citizen, scientist, citizen, scientist, joining the planet-wide dance that helps human knowledge advance.
Hello, K-Squidders. It's every other Sunday again, and you're listening to Sustainability Now, a bi-weekly K-Squid radio show program focused on environment, sustainability, and social justice in the Monterey Bay region, California, and the world. I'm your host, Ronnie Lipschutz. My guests today are Rebecca Johnson and Alison Young from the San Francisco Academy of Sciences, where they're co-directors of the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science, an academy program that is research and monitoring driven and controlled by local communities and characterized by place-based knowledge, social learning, collective action, and empowerment. Rebecca and Alison, welcome to Sustainability Now. So why don't we start with some basics? What is the California Academy of Sciences? When was it established? By whom? And to what end?
Yeah, and this is Rebecca. Maybe I'll go ahead. Just a little warning, Alison and I sound a lot alike, so we might say our names sometimes. So the California Academy of Sciences is a natural history museum in San Francisco. We're currently located in Golden Gate Park. We were founded in 1853 in San Francisco by a group of folks. At the time, they were all white men, mostly wealthy white men, who had made their money through the gold rush and through other industries associated with the gold rush, and were quite interested in kind of celebrating the biodiversity of California and sharing it with the rest of the world. So they wanted to create an academy to share resources and in those days, it really meant sharing a library and a space and creating a place where they could talk about nature and geology. Actually, many of these men were quite interested in the mineral resources of California as well. So yeah, they founded it as a place to talk about the study and explore and celebrate California biodiversity. And when Alison and I talk, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, to think about these guys as being concerned about biodiversity is a little bit startling or surprising. I mean, what did they mean? What did they mean by biodiversity?
I think if you read some of our founding documents, they talk about the flora and fauna, right? So they talk about plants and animals. And they recognized that the diversity that they saw here was quite different than that they had seen or experienced in other places in the United States, mostly the East Coast. And they wanted to talk about it, and they wanted to find a group of like-minded people to talk about it. And it wasn't until a few years later, maybe even closer to 20 years later, that we had a public-facing part of the academy. So originally, it was founded as a place to talk about nature, to talk about plants and animals and minerals and the state. And then we added on a public museum.
That's interesting. And so what's the current mission of the academy? And what is its balance among research, education, and activism?
Yeah, so
Alison.
We have just recently changed our mission. We have had a new mission in the last year and a half or so, 2 years. It's to regenerate the natural world through science, learning, and collaboration. And so, the balance of research and education, I would say, is like almost equal at the Academy. We have a super active research division where our curators and fellow scientists travel throughout California, actually, and throughout the world, documenting species and describing species and trying to understand the relationships between species. But being a public museum, then obviously we have a very, very active education program as well that have, not only the exhibits and what you learn when you come to the Academy itself, but tons of education programs that are reaching teachers and students, out in the community where they are, as well as lots of online, to reach people no matter where they are in the world with our education programs. In terms of activism, the Academy is something we're starting to lean into more as an entire like academy, where in the past, there might have been, bills that are coming up that, backed based on the science. There are things that we've backed, but we are actually taking now a more active approach and actually advocacy is one of our values now, which it hasn't been in the past. It's one of our new values of the Academy. And so we're still kind of working as an academy to figure out kind of like what's the best way to go about having like an academy-wide advocacy policy. But, mainly it's thinking about what are those things that we can stand up for that are based in science that we should take a stand for, and that we can also like activate our members and, community around as well.
Well, when I said activism, I was actually thinking more about this community science angle, right? As opposed to politics. I mean, I think, it's great that you're paying attention to that. And of course, the image of science, right, is that it's just facts, and it doesn't take a position on politics. I mean, we've learned in the last few years for sure that is not the case. But it's more has to do with this community engagement. So you're both co-directors of the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science at the Academy. So what does the center do, and what do you do at the center?
So
go ahead,
Alison, so the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science is part of our research division. So Alison and I co-direct the center. We're both also scientists. And what we do is we work to engage people wherever they are, all kinds of different people, in making and sharing observations of nature, making and sharing biodiversity observations. We use an app called iNaturalist to help to gather those data. And once people take pictures and share the pictures of the nature that they're encountering, it's really our job to take those pictures and help mobilize them collectively, because they are data, to help answer questions, science questions, conservation questions, help inform policy. And so that's what we do. And the kind of data we collect together with people, where species are when, is very similar to the core of Natural History Museum collections data. So at our Natural History Museum, we have over close to 50 million Natural History Museum specimens. And all of those are physical things, right? But associated with those physical things are the date it was collected, the time, the place, who collected it, and where. And those core bits of information are in pictures that we take now with our smartphones and share. And so we're collecting similar data with people, school kids, families, children, adults when they're hiking, like anyone who sees something alive and wants to share it, find out what it is, and then help contribute to this effort. They're all collecting data that help us understand where plants and animals are now and how that's changing. And we can compare that to what we know about the past from our collections and help understand what changes we're seeing now.
And so what are your roles then with the center? And more broadly, at the Academy, I have the question here, what are your specializations? So talk about that as well.
Yeah. So Rebecca and I are actually both marine biologists, where Rebecca is a nudibranch specialist, a nudibranch taxonomist, so sea slugs, while I am an intertidal ecologist. And so our roles in the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science, when we first started working together, when we were like put together and kind of given this like command to do some community science out there, we basically worked on designing kind of programs that people could come to and document biodiversity together. So we started a program actually in the tide pools down by Half Moon Bay, because that's advances our curiosity and the questions that we have. We also started started a terrestrial project up on Mount Tamalpais at the time as well. And through time, this has kind of evolved, where we basically kind of our roles, kind of the core of what we do in community science is to design and run events and campaigns and build the partnerships that support those, where people are making and sharing biodiversity observations. Rebecca mentioned iNaturalist, which is another actually separate department at the Academy, that they're based at the Academy, which is this app and this platform that we use. And we really see ourselves as kind of giving people reasons why they should be going out and documenting biodiversity. It's one of those things that some people are going to find that on their own. They're going to find iNaturalist because they've always been looking for something where they can like share their observations of nature because they're super into it already. But a lot of folks, they need to be given a reason, like why should I be documenting my biodiversity, local biodiversity? How do I do it? Like, what are those things I should be looking for? And so we really think of our role as kind of, designing like the reasons, giving people reasons, and meeting other people who are interested in nature as well.
What exactly is community science? I mean, you've talked about it already, right? But I'm curious about the theory behind it. And I have a question here about the nature of data and, and it's how it's collected and what's considered quality data, right? And I want to come back to that later, but let's start with, this question of what exactly is community science?
So we use the term community science to describe the work we do, which is working together with people to do science, to collect data, and to use those data to answer questions. It's a little tricky because community science can mean something else, right? So the term community science has also been used to describe community-driven research, where communities have questions, usually around environmental injustice.
Right.
And they have a question, and they look to partner with academic or professional researchers to help answer those questions, usually, to help with methods, but also to give some like academic weight to community concerns. Unfortunately, that is often needed. So the term community science has been used in the environmental justice field to describe that kind of work. It's also been used in the field of public health to describe similar community-driven efforts. And the work that Alison and I do, until was originally described as citizen science, right? Like, actually, museums like ours have been working with non-professionals or amateurs since they were founded. Right. I mean, in fact, those men that I talked about, they were all amateurs.
Yeah.
None of them were paid to do that work. The professionalization of science is actually newer than the doing science, right? So making it a profession, the fact that I can be a professional scientist is newer than. But the Academy, actually, when we were founded in 1853, did invite the participation of women, and that was actually very progressive at the time. I mean, there were lots of things about that founding that were not progressive, right? All these wealthy white men that had time, taking advantage of, California laws that were remove Native peoples from their lands to be able to explore. Like, there are lots of things that weren't very progressive, but including women as equal partners in that research was something that was quite great. So when we first founded our department, we actually were called the Citizen Science Department. And this was the term that was used in the academic field to describe citizens of the world, right, working together on a scientific endeavor. But the term citizen is loaded and problematic. And, if one person feels excluded because they're not a citizen of the United States, then we don't want to run a program like that. Our program is for everyone. So we changed the name of our work and started using community science, but we changed it a little later than many of our colleagues because of that. We didn't want to co-opt a term that's been used in the environmental justice community. But you can look on our website, and we wrote a piece about the change that we made.
I saw it. Yeah.
So more and more people are referring to the kind of work we do as community science.
You're listening to Sustainability Now. I'm Ronnie Lipschutz, and I'm speaking with Rebecca Johnson and Alison Young, co-directors of the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science at the California Academy of Sciences. I wanted to ask some questions about the data collection. How does the scientific community regard community science in the sense of, where people collect is not the result of some sort of careful inspection of sites. It's really where people are.
So first of all, there's lots of different types of community science, right? So there are ones that are like our programs, which are just, sending people out to collect data points, like, where is nature now? Can you go and take photographs of species? There are others, community science programs where actually volunteers go through really deep training before they can even volunteer. Where there is a lot of scientific rigor in training those volunteers. And I'm not going to say that one type of community science is better than the other. Like, our type can engage more people because the barrier to entry is much lower. Mm-hmm. But yeah, then, it is very messy data, but you get a lot of it, right?
Yeah,
so
sure. Yeah.
With big data sources, it's easier to kind of weed out that noise. And that's actually something that we do in our work. We were saying that Rebecca and I kind of run the community science side of things, but we have data scientists in our Center for Biodiversity and Community Science that work to, understand those biases and analyze the data and model them in such a way where we actually are able to kind of pick up the trends out of the larger data set. So in terms of, how professional scientists see community science, part of it is there has definitely been growing acceptance, and I'd say it's much more accepted now than it was 10 years ago, for sure, especially because so many people now have demonstrated the power, especially in our type of community science where you have so many people out and documenting nature. Just the resulting data is just so useful. You really just can't ignore it. Like, it's been used already to answer so many questions.
Yeah.
And then other types of projects have, other types of methods that would help also validate those sorts of data that those community scientists are collecting as well. Luckily for us, since we use the iNaturalist platform, iNaturalist has also evolved over the time that we've been using it, and now it actually has artificial intelligence or computer vision that actually will suggest identifications. Mm-hmm. And then the wonderful thing too is because we have all these people who are out making and sharing observations, all of those people can also help on the identification side too. So it's not like there's like a team of scientists sitting in a room like IDing all these photos that come in. But the community is there. They can also, they can correct misidentifications. They can validate, the computer learning identifications, things like that as well. So it's often, we relate it because Rebecca said it's the same sort of information that's like in our collections. But if there's like a misidentification in our collections, that's way harder to change than a misidentification on iNaturalist. You have to have someone who like knows those species, who happens to come to our collections, who finds the right jars or and then like changes the identification on the label, which then has to get into the database. Having it public on iNaturalist means that that identification process, even if it's wrong in the beginning, can be updated so much faster.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I mean, while you're talking, I was thinking about the way in which data scientists use various kinds of trends and things on social media, for example, to try and, make statements about what's going on. And I mean, I hadn't really thought about that, but that of course leads to another question, which is, to do it, you have to have a smartphone. Do you see any kind of bias in terms of who's sending in data and for instance, where the data are collected?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So you can use the iNaturalist app and submit photos using your smartphone, and that's how most people do it. But you can also use a digital camera, right? So you can make observations using a camera. You don't have to have a smartphone. Mm-hmm. Usually, actually, people that are using cameras have like really fancy technical cameras to get pictures of things like birds or like underwater. But for sure, there are biases in the data that are collected. There are biases in the things that people take pictures of, right? Like, I study nudibranchs or sea slugs. They're like super beautiful and really brightly colored. When people go to the tide pools and they find those, they're more likely to take pictures of nudibranchs than they are of barnacles, right? I mean, barnacles are awesome, but they're not as photogenic, right, as a nudibranch. And so what things people take pictures of varies, and it varies on the individual. Like some person might love barnacles more than anything. That's all they take pictures of, right? So it definitely varies. There are biases about where people go. People are more likely to go to places that are near roads or near cities that have trails. People are more likely to make observations on the weekend than they are during the week, right? And so these biases are throughout the data. you know, people are more likely to go to parks or natural areas than they are to like go to the middle of a city, right, to take pictures of nature. But there's nature everywhere, and we need those data. And so that's one of the things that we try to kind of mitigate, I guess, for some of those biases on both ends of our programming, right? So we design programs and campaigns to get people to go to certain places and take pictures of certain things and encourage them to take pictures of everything, right? Not just, you know, the really beautiful butterfly, but also like that grass that it's next to, or the other plants that you see. And then on the data science side, you know, we've had really amazing data scientists on our team, Gio Rapacciolo, who now works for NatureServe, which is an amazing organization, design a way, like a recipe basically, to combat a bunch of the biases that you see in community collected data. So instead of like some of the programs that Alison was talking about that have these, you know, transects and quadrats and like rigorous protocols on the front end, like most professional, you know, ecological monitoring or other kind of surveying does, we do the kind of cleanup on the back end and like kind of take all comers and then kind of try to work it on the back end.
That's quite interesting. Well, you've been talking about iNaturalist. So why don't you say some more about that, and, you know, maybe where listeners can look, you know, to sign up.
Yeah. So iNaturalist, you can find it on the web at iNaturalist.org or in whatever app store that you use under iNaturalist, if you're interested in checking it out. So yeah, it's the platform that we use in the type of community science that we do that basically allows people anywhere to make and share their observations of nature. The primary way that people do that is by taking photographs. Because it's really easy to take photographs of a lot of things, which is really nice, but you can also do things like record sound. So it's really documenting organisms and evidence of those organisms. It also doesn't necessarily have to be things that are alive. People take pictures of feathers or tracks or shells they find on the beach as well. But basically it's a way for people to make and share those observations, get help with identifications, which is really nice. You can also then explore all the data that anyone's seen anywhere. So if you have a favorite park and you want to see like what people have seen in that park, you can zoom in there, or you can, you know, look at all the data from the entire world. All the data is open, which is really nice as well, so that everyone can use it to answer the questions that they might have about nature. And iNaturalist is part of the California Academy of Sciences, where we work. It's also co-owned by the National Geographic. But it was actually started as a master's project at UC Berkeley by Kenichi Ueda, who's one of the still to today co-directors of iNaturalist as well. And you know, he really designed it to be more than anything a social network. That he had moved to California from the East Coast and wanted to learn more about the nature in California, but it's kind of a pain to hike with, like, you know, your field guides, like your butterflies, your plants, your reptiles, you know. So he was really looking for a way where he could kind of meet a community who could help him identify the things that he was seeing. And it turned into iNaturalist. And that really is like the power of it more than anything, is that there's people there that are, you know, sharing and talking about what you found and helping you with your identifications and getting excited about the things that you see. And, you know, we have an amazing community of folks here in the Bay Area and beyond as well that we've like met through iNaturalist and now like are considered friends. So it's a great way to kind of meet a community as well.
So the Academy is basically the owner controller of the platform. I'm just trying to understand. Do other institutions have access to it, or do you get all of the data and do the data analysis and then make it available to others? How does that work?
No, the data is totally open to anybody. So we acquired iNaturalist basically almost 10 years ago now, but we kept all the same staff. They basically just now have staff positions at the Academy. I see. But there's nothing special about the Academy having iNaturalist in any way. Like anything that we can do with the data, anyone else can do with the data.
Are there other platforms like that in existence?
So there are some other more regional platforms and other smaller platforms. iNaturalist is the biggest of its kind, right? So on iNaturalist, there are, almost 100 million observations have been shared from all over the world by over 2 million people. And it's iNaturalist now is generating like the largest data set of biodiversity like in the world. It's the biggest and most dynamic place to find out about biodiversity. There are other platforms. Alison can speak to some of the other platforms, but there are some other platforms throughout the world that people use.
Yeah, you can imagine like there's some that are like, it's all the biodiversity of this country platform. There's also platforms that are like eBird, for example, which is global, but it's birds.
Yeah.
So there are other platforms that kind of do similar things, but iNaturalist, like Rebecca was saying, it's global and it includes all taxa, which no other platform really is.
Right.
And I saw that you are doing. Where does that question go? Oh, you're engaged in a project to document coastal biodiversity, and I guess that's a sort of a connected to iNaturalist.
Yeah, for sure. So Alison and I run two big scaled projects that use iNaturalist and this model of organizing people to collect biodiversity like at a certain time for a certain reason, right? So there are two projects. One is called Snapshot Cal Coast, and that's a California coastal project. And the other is called City Nature Challenge, which is a global project.
Let's come back to that one, okay? Because I have a bunch of questions about cities. So tell us about
let me tell you first about the Snapshot Cal Coast. So the Snapshot Cal Coast will be its 7th year. It's an effort of folks up and down the coast to get out and make and share biodiversity observations for 2 weeks every summer. So we work with partners in every coastal county, and we help train them to use iNaturalist, give them other kinds of things they might need, like postcards to promote their events, stickers to give their participants. We give them a little money for food if they're holding events. But really, we all work together to create and build a snapshot of coastal biodiversity at a certain time. And then we compare year over year how that coastal biodiversity is changing. That's why it's called Snapshot Cal Coast. And that work is supported by the California Ocean Protection Council. They're the folks in the state government that are responsible for managing our coasts and oceans. And so together we gather all these data, we connect people to the coast in new and different ways. Everybody does Snapshot Cal Coast differently. Like some folks might take out their, whole lab, like professors will take their lab out, or the whole volunteer crew from a state park will go out, or some people have public events. Hopefully this year we'll have more public events than we've had the past couple of years, and people just go out on their own and make and share observations. And we have a most wanted species list where we ask people to look for certain species that we know their range is changing, that we're interested in and tracking those species. And also we have a little checklist to make sure that people take pictures of things like those barnacles I was mentioning, or sea anemones, like, hey, make sure you take pictures of all the things you see. And then those data, we group all together, and we're building, in partnership with the state, we're building what we're calling an early warning and forecasting system for changes along the California coast. And that's where we model those data and put them together with climate projections and look and see what can we say about what might be happening along our coast.
Do you focus on specific locations, or is this anywhere on the coast?
It's anywhere on the coast.
Okay.
We do have some places that we, inside MPAs are great, but also outside MPAs are really, these are MPAs, meaning marine protected areas.
Yeah.
So really though, anywhere on the coast is an important spot. We focus and have focused a lot on rocky intertidal habitats, but all places are great. So anywhere along the coast, and also in bays. So like the San Francisco Bay counts as well for the Snapshot Cal Coast.
You're listening to Sustainability Now. I'm Ronnie Lipschutz, and I'm speaking with Rebecca Johnson and Alison Young, co-directors of the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science at the California Academy of Sciences. You mentioned the City Nature Challenge. And I see that that's an annual event, right? Can you tell us, what that is and how it works?
So much like Snapshot Cal Coast, it's a similar model. It's one time a year. It's 4 days long, though. Unlike Snapshot Cal Coast, it's a couple weeks long. So it's 4 days where we follow a similar model. So this is run by us and our colleagues at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. So their community science department, we do this together. And we're kind of like the main organizers. But what we do is we have local organizers who basically sign up their city for the City Nature Challenge. And we work with those local organizers to, give them support and resources and training. We teach them how to use iNaturalist. We teach them, how do you hold a BioBlitz event? We give them like posters and social media kits and all these sorts of things. And then they make the City Nature Challenge happen in their city over those 4 days. And so it's kind of like it's a big scaled BioBlitz. It's kind of a competition meets collaboration as well. That, a lot of times cities are trying to win. They're trying to make the most observations. They're trying to find the most species. They're trying to get the most participants involved. But it's also this wonderful thing where it's all these cities around the world all together at the same time, documenting their urban and metro area biodiversity. So it is really focused around cities and the areas around cities.
So you're having people going around and taking pictures of the things that they see, right? Does this include things that we might not necessarily want to see? I mean, do you try to document, let's just say, rats?
The main thing that we're trying to document are wild species. So things that weren't, not like necessarily the plants that you've planted in your backyard. But sure, the weeds that are growing up in between them, 100%. Right. So it is really about understanding the nature that's all around us in our cities and around our cities as well, regardless of if we consider them a good, in quotes, species or not, or something that we're happy to see or sometimes maybe not as happy to see.
Okay. I've been interested in urban ecology for a long time. And a lot of people regard cities as places outside of nature. I mean, they really are transformed landscapes. And so this is a little bit different. And I was wondering if you could talk about how cities are enmeshed with species biodiversity and ecosystems, and maybe what role they play. I mean, how important are they, in terms of global biodiversity and the like?
I can start and then let Rebecca chime in. We do see cities as really important. Obviously, they are very altered landscapes, but there is still nature in them and nature all around them as well. And especially as we think about, making sure that we have things like wildlife corridors and ways for organisms to move through cities, understanding the biodiversity that we have in cities is a really key thing to do. So thinking about, not cities as like that blank spot on the map that has like no nature at all, but actually how can we, not only, understand the nature that's already in here, but potentially even improve cities to make them better places for nature, or for places that nature can move through more easily as well. The City Nature Challenge is really about getting people to think about the fact that there is nature in their cities, and that it's not that they have to, drive out to Yosemite to be in nature, that it is all around us. And that it really gives people a chance to kind of actually see how much biodiversity is truly in cities. Rebecca, I don't know if you had more you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think that, there's another thing that's really important about nature in cities. Over 50% of the people in the world live in cities or urbanized environments, right? Yeah. So, and those are very altered places. Everywhere on the planet's altered in some way, but we live, I'm talking to you from San Francisco, so I'm sitting in the city right now. And the nature that's found here is like extra precious, right? These like remnant native areas, because they are so rare. And I feel like we have an extra responsibility to protect those places for nature, but then also for us, for people that live in cities, so we can experience the amazing biodiversity of our place just by walking outside of our front doors, right? Like Alison said, to know that you don't have to go far to find that nature is really important. For me, just to like be connected to my place There are also, there's lots and lots of evidence that spending time in nature is very important for your mental and physical well-being, and that just walking in nature or an open space, lowers your cortisol levels. Just spending 20 minutes in an open or natural space is important for everyone, and it's especially important for people that are living in cities, right, who don't have access to that as easily. So to make sure that we have more green spaces and more nature is important for the people that live in cities, but also for managing things like climate change and urban heat islands and sea level rise and all these other things that are coming to cities, whether they're here now and coming. Improving and restoring nature in cities and incorporating nature-based solutions into our cities can help mitigate some of those challenges of climate change and also give people the benefits of being surrounded by nature, right? The physical and spiritual benefits. And those are things that we can and should be doing in our cities.
You mentioned that more than half of the world's people live in cities, right? And so cities are major contributors now to emissions, right, that are driving climate change. Are you looking at the impacts of climate change on nature in cities?
Well, one of the things that we're, and it's a really, really great question. So one of the things, Alison and I are leading a new academy initiative that's called Thriving California, that's looking at nature and people in California, and how can we use our expertise together with the expertise of all Californians to help build a thriving California for nature and people. Like, this is what we're doing together. I'm planning to do together. And one of the things that we know through that work is that if we collect all these data together about where plants and animals are found now in all the ways that we just described, and add that together with what we know about past biodiversity in California, and the projected climate change that we know is coming, we can make plans and forecast future changes that will help. Like, we can use that information to help make better decisions for people and nature in cities, in suburbs, in rural areas. In California, we have all of those things like really, really close together, right? So we know that these kinds of data about where plants and animals are found are super critical to making decisions about so many things in California. Our state is just now investing in something called the 30 by 30 effort, which is protecting 30% of California's land and coastal waters for biodiversity by 2030. So our state is funding this effort, but in order to make decisions about how to do that best, we need to know where plants and animals are now and where they're going to be in the future. And together, we can collect that data in a way that no one else can, right? All Californians together can do that. And one of the parts of that is knowing where nature is in cities now and understanding how we can plan best for a changing climate to make our cities better for us and for nature.
Are any of these projects that you're running, with the data collection, are you having people try to document any of these changes, or how long has iNaturalist been going on?
iNaturalist has been running now for, 13, 14 years.
But in the sense of, you're accumulating data and then, right. How long have you been running it? Has the Academy been running it, basically?
Well, so we've been running our community science program since about 2012, and iNaturalist came to the Academy around 2013.
Okay, so are you trying to use that kind of data to document changes resulting from climate change on urban ecology, or have you done anything like that? Again, there's this whole sort of tension, right, between where people live and especially at the urban-rural interface, right, which is, of course, where the fires break out to a large degree. But I mean, are you able to use that sort of chronological data to actually start to see these kinds of changes in more or less real time?
Yeah, you definitely can, using iNaturalist data, see things, because it's all about organisms. You can definitely see things like shifts in species distributions, like species whose ranges are changing due to climate change, or most likely due to climate change, things like that. So that's the type of information that we definitely are already looking at on iNaturalist, and that it's not just us, it's like scientists and people all over the world are using iNat data for things like this as well. It's definitely something that we're interested in doing more of, especially, as Rebecca said, as we like really dive into this Thriving California initiative, is really understanding like what can we extract not only from iNaturalist data, but then from our historic collections together. So not only are we getting a picture of the last 12 years that iNaturalist has really been up and running, but also using that historic perspective to really understand the change that's already occurred and those drivers of those changes. Like, why is this species moving? Is it because the daytime temperatures are too warm for them and so they're moving north? Or is it because water resources are really important to this species and they're trying to follow, due to drought in California, they're changing their ranges, things like that. And so getting that historic perspective is really going to help in this, basically like thinking about not only what changes are happening, but what are those main drivers of change, of those changes, not just like climate change as a whole, but like what are those specific things that are really affecting species.
I'm Ronnie Lipschutz, and I'm speaking with Rebecca Johnson and Alison Young, co-directors of the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science at the California Academy of Sciences. Can you talk a bit about opportunistic species in cities and wildlife that's moving in? I live on the UC Santa Cruz campus, basically, and we actually had a coyote walk through our backyard the other day. I don't know what exactly it was doing, but we have coyotes coming through here, but we're really at that interface, not downtown Santa Cruz. But, what's going on and why is it happening?
Yeah, I think coyotes are kind of the poster children for species moving into cities, right? I mean, in San Francisco, we have a very healthy population of coyotes. Like, I can hear them from my house sometimes, and I don't live in, I live on a city street.
Right.
And so, I think there are a lot of coyotes are very adapted to human environments, just like raccoons, right? Like, they do pretty well when humans are around. Same with squirrels. There are a lot of species that thrive with humans. And I think, I'm not an expert in coyotes or these mammals moving in. If you want to have some folks talk about coyotes, you should ask Chris Schell from UC Berkeley and his lab. They study urban coyotes and urban wildlife. They are an awesome group of folks. But, we've done a lot of work here in the city and other places to restore these natural habitats, right? We've done great work to, the Presidio now, just a mile from my house, is an amazing, huge open natural area. And there are lots of places for coyotes to make a living because we've done a good job of protecting other nature, which is great, right? In many ways. I mean, it does lead to some human wildlife conflict. Generally, if you leave them alone, there's not as much conflict. But there are lots of other species that are doing well in cities. And there are also lots of folks working to bring species back into cities that have been lost. Like, our colleagues in the Presidio have brought back, butterflies and other species that are really important for these are still urban areas, but really important for the ecosystem functioning. And they're doing great things to kind of restore some of that functioning and these amazing species that used to be found here, but were extirpated, which means like they exist other places, but not in the city, but were extirpated because of human development. And so now we're bringing them back because we have the infrastructure, like basically the plant and water infrastructure to be able to support them.
You're at the Academy. The Academy, as you say, is a museum, and lots of people coming through, lots of children coming through. Do you do exhibits about the kind of community science that you oversee, and what do those exhibits look like?
Yeah, we have right now, kind of our community science work is kind of scattered throughout the Academy, right? Because it is something that you can do almost anywhere, the type of community science work that we're doing. And so We have in like our Color of Life exhibit right now, stuff about how you can get involved in taking photos and like thinking about, where plants and animals are in the world. We have some stuff, some information about our community science program over in our Giants of Land and Sea, which is kind of focused on California as well. And over there, it's actually specifically about like certain species in California that we're really interested. We'd love people to go and document and things like that. We are really excited, though, as part of this new Thriving California initiative that Rebecca described earlier, that we're actually going to be transforming that space that right now is generally about California, actually into kind of a California hall.
Mm-hmm.
And what we really want to do there is, because so much of this initiative is about the data that everybody is collecting, that all Californians and people who visit California, the data that they collect and how it's actually being used to help make California a better place,
Mm-hmm.
that we're really excited to actually have like a very dedicated space, hopefully in that exhibit, as it's being updated over the next, like 4 or 5 years, that
Mm-hmm.
will actually kind of be highlighting all those observations that people are making, so that hopefully, if you're out there and you're documenting something in your backyard, you can come to the Academy and actually like see that as part of an exhibit. So probably something more digital and interactive. But we are really excited about like putting it in a more central place, to really highlight the fact that this type of information can really only be collected by everybody. But it's really everybody doing it that's actually giving us this picture of biodiversity in California and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you target any of your programs, community science programs, specifically to kids?
We work closely. We do have a whole after school program at the Academy that uses community science as like a platform to teach science and to help kids learn like scientific methods of scientific inquiry and to do science themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's called the Science Action Club. And they do a bunch of community science with mostly middle school youth. And Alison and I, just are finishing up a grant that we had with some colleagues at the Natural History Museum in London and the LA County Natural History Museum to understand how like youth learning through Natural History Museum, citizen and community science.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've done a lot of work to think about what are the best ways to design programs and what are the best ways to deliver programs that lead to learning outcomes for students, and also what's called environmental science agency, which is like thinking that knowing and learning that you can make a difference in your life through the things that you've learned. And so we've done that work to help design our programs to lead to those outcomes. But most of the programs that we deliver are for youth and their families, like for families, and sometimes there are kids there.
Yeah, no, I would think that it would offer, great opportunity, because there's so much in the way of classes and groups and organizations for children who are taking kids out, right? And it's a whole sort of set of data, that you could collect. I don't know I don't know who has smartphones these days, right? It seems
it seems like everybody.
It seems like everybody, right? But
yeah.
So there's a whole untapped audience or reservoir, I guess. And are you thinking about that?
Oh yeah. For sure. And definitely like oftentimes, especially in these like big scaled projects that we run, like the City Nature Challenge and Snapshot Cal Coast, there are teachers who are like, I'm taking my class out for this and we're going to go make and share observations. So we definitely have, especially for the City Nature Challenge, we actually have a whole education toolkit that's designed for educators, like literally from K all the way through college age, to do this sort of work with their class. I'll also say as well that iNaturalist actually has developed an app that's actually targeted for youth that are 12 and under, technically, to have an iNaturalist account, because it shares your location. You're supposed to be 13 years old or older, or have your parents' permission. So there's an app called Seek by iNaturalist, which actually is designed to, it's self-contained. It all stays in your phone, so you're not sharing information about where you are unless you authorize it to do it. But it basically is designed to actually teach youth like about observing, like what are like how close do you need to get before it can identify that thing that you're looking at, and it gives you like challenges based on where you are. It says like, these are the 10 most observed things in your city or in your neighborhood, like can you go find them? and you get badges as you find them. So, it is kind of targeted towards youth, and really kind of builds their observational skills and makes them good observers and good photo takers of things until they're ready to be on iNaturalist.
Well, listen, we're almost at the end of our time together. And so I'm wondering if you can maybe say something about where listeners can go to learn more about community science and to sign on to your projects.
Yeah, so there are a couple places to go. You can go to our website and if you just Google community science at Cal Academy, you'll find it. And you can learn about all of these programs that we've talked about today, and upcoming events, especially for Snapshot Cal Coast. So that happens in June. So June 13th to July 4th this year. And so we and our partners will have events up and down the coast. So wherever folks are listening from, if they're especially in Santa Cruz, you can get out to the coast with some local events. You can also just go to iNaturalist and get yourself a login. iNaturalist it's an app on your phone, but it's also an amazing website where you can dig in and learn more about nature all around you. And I would say, we've done a lot of talking about taking pictures and using your smartphone and using apps in nature. But really, the whole goal of our program, besides collecting data to do good science and conservation, is to encourage people to be curious and get outside and pay attention to nature, whether you're a kid or an adult. And so when I'm out with my smartphone, I use it as a camera. I don't, use the app so much outside. I use it as a camera. And so, I would encourage people to just get out and pay attention to all of the things that are on, maybe your favorite trail. Think about that trail differently and try to document, all the plants that you can see. How many different species of plants can you see on your trail? And take pictures of those and then upload them when you get back. And if you do that all the time, you start learning about nature, about changes through time, about seasonality, and you start learning more and more. And although we've talked a lot about data today, that's really the dual goal of all the work that we do, is people, being more connected to nature and observing more carefully and just understanding how our planet works more. And that's one of the ways to do that is by paying more attention.
Well, Rebecca Johnson and Alison Young, thank you for being my guests on Sustainability Now.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Okay. And I look forward to getting to the Academy and seeing what you've got there. Now I have a reason to go. So thanks for listening, and thanks for all the staff and volunteers who make KSQD your community radio station. And so, until next every other Sunday, Sustainability Now.
I'm a citizen